here, this is what's called the package associated with an offer from a PhD program. Now, that's not a ton of money we're talking about. It's just sort of in exchange for expecting that you will be there all the time. And so, as a result, some people tend to also take out personal loans. There are other forms of money here as well. And this bypasses the whole university system to some degree. And these are fellowships. These fellowships are designed to, again, well, actually specifically to bypass that system. They are competitive. They are sometimes completely merit-based, sometimes partially merit-based, and focused on specific populations or specific research areas, or specific research areas that are underrepresented by specific populations. So you can see that there are a lot of combinations of things out there. Here are some examples. The National Science Foundation has a completely merit-based fellowship. The APA has several different fellowships, some that are focused on ethnic minorities, some that are focused on first-generation PhD students, some that are focused on specific areas of research like HIV prevention or substance abuse. The NIH and the NIMH sometimes work with APA and also have their own fellowships as well. So this is some research. If you're going PhD that you need to do, you need to look into this stuff to see if you're eligible for some of these. You can apply for these programs at the same time that you're applying for PhD programs. In addition, as it was the case in my graduate program, some graduate programs will require that you apply for fellowships in your first year, right? And that makes sense because that's money that they wouldn't have to shell out for you, that they can carry over and give to someone else if you bring your own money. So it's in their best interest, not just because there's an honor associated with getting this money, but that it's money. Now, what is this money exactly? This is the best deal of all. It's typically as much as or more than the stipend associated with an assistantship, plus tuition. Some of these fellowships are 3-year fellowships, some are 4 years. It just depends. Some of them may even be like as long as you're in school. In addition, some of them have money on top of those two things for research, travel to conferences, or money to help fund the research that you're engaged in. So if you get this, you don't have to be a TA. You don't have to work in someone else's lab. You'll find that sometimes you work for your mentor and you work for someone else, and because that's where you get your money. But if you get one of these, you don't have to do that. Okay. Having said all that, there are scholarships and fellowships associated with the master's level training degrees, but they're a lot harder to find. And some of them are focused on what you plan to do after you get those degrees. For example, social work. California has a social work fellowship, and I forget what it's called. Title 15, Title 4, I don't know, something like that. But it's designed to give students money for working in specific environments after they get their degree. So you agree to do that. The military has similar programs where if you agree to give them military service, they will pay for part of your graduate education. There are a lot of different opportunities out there for these sorts of arrangements. In particular, there was the clinical psych and PsyD and counseling psychologists who all have to do internships. The military internships pay really well. But in exchange, they often say, you have to become an officer, and you have to give us 3 years or more of service. Well, it's a trade-off, and that might be attractive to some people. Okay. In order to help you be a little bit more prepared for the entire graduate school process, whether you're a PhD or you're not, we have to understand what the criteria are for getting in. And it's the same for everybody. GPA. GRE scores most often. Letters of recommendation, always. Relevant experience, always. Okay? Why are these the criteria to consider? Because they are trying to determine your potential for success. And they have a sense for what that means. One is your intelligence level, right? How bright a person are you? Well, what metric do they have for understanding what your intelligence level is? There they are right there. GPA and GRE scores. Well, what else? Well, maybe what your letter writers say about you as well, right? But these are the criteria to consider. They also want to know that you are dedicated to this discipline. And the way that you do that is by getting relevant experience. Now, just listing the type of experience that you had is not good enough. They need to have an assessment of how good you are in this discipline. And that's where the letters of recommendation become critical. These people paint a picture of you that the admissions committee uses to determine whether you should go into their program or not. Having said that, you can see how the package, the typical application package, is a function of what those criteria are, right? GPA is important, so you've got to send transcripts and test scores for GRE scores. It may be GRE or ACT, or there may be no test scores involved, but in general, there are test scores that are required to be sent. Letters of recommendation go in your package, and a CV, or a resume, or some write-up of what you've done and what you've accomplished. What are your honors? What are your publications? What are your invited speeches? What are the things that you've done? What are the products of your experiences? And what are your experiences? And in addition, a statement of interest, that's for research, or statement of research, or a personal statement. These are terms that vary depending on the program, and sometimes they have relevance, just the naming them differently, but sometimes it's just the name that they chose to use. And I'll help you understand some of that. Let's think about the personal statement for a second here. In psychology programs, like PhD programs, or Masters of Science programs, your personal statement has to be about your research, okay? The emphasis is on research, and so the statement has to be about research. I've had people ask the questions, well, don't they want you to talk about yourself? Well, yeah, you can talk about yourself, and how does that relate to your research interests? Don't they want you to talk about, like, experiences that you've had? Yes, they want you to talk about experiences that you've had. And how does that relate to your research interests? Or your research skills? Or the faculty mentor you'd like to work with, okay? In fact, one of the things that I can't say often enough is that if you want to get into a PhD program, you need to know that if the match is not there between yourself and either the program or some faculty member, then you will not get in no matter how good you look on paper. That's PhD programs. Let me explain what I mean by match here. Most PhD programs work on what's called a mentor system, which means that, yeah, you're going to a PhD program, you're taking coursework, and all the students take the same coursework, sure, and everyone's required to do a lot of the same stuff. So yes, all the students take the same group of courses, they go through the same process, but the thing that's different is that they're being mentored by a particular faculty person, right? And that research, the research experience that they're getting is in that person's laboratory. They're learning the methods that this person uses in their research. They're learning the intricacies associated with this field of research. In other words, they're being mentored by this person. And so since that's the case, the way admissions processes work typically are you sort of apply and you get through a certain level where you're deemed acceptable, and then faculty mentors come in and say, I like that person, I'd like to extend an offer to her. Or either one of these two would be okay. Or I'm not taking anybody this year, so I'm not going to be involved with the admissions committee at all. So match is important. One of the things I can tell you if you want to go to a PhD program is to do your research and to contact these people ahead of time. It's important, especially for what I just said. If you... do this in my pocket. It's important because if you want to work with a certain... So you've got the match thing down, right? And you want to work with a certain faculty mentor. And that faculty mentor isn't taking students that year, then maybe you shouldn't bother applying to that program this year. You wouldn't know that unless you put the feelers out, unless you tried to contact that person to begin with. And that's very acceptable when it comes to PhD programs. You don't have to do this in the dark. You should be contacting potential mentors. Okay. Given that, it's not about your philosophy for helping other people, right? Although I said that that's one of the things we all have in common, we're here because we like people, most of us, or because we want to help people, again, most of us. Your personal statement for a research program should not be about how you want to help people, unless it's related to your research. Master's programs, the hands-on that we were talking about, they actually do want to know about your philosophy of helping other people. They do want to know about your experiences. They do want to know about the things that shape your philosophy, about why you want to be a professional, about why you want to listen to people's problems day in and day out. You've got to have some reason. If you can't give them a good reason, they may not buy it. So they do want to know about this stuff. But match is important here, too. Okay? If you go out there and you explain what your philosophy is and sort of what you think about helping other people, and it doesn't match the philosophy of the program, they are not going to be interested in you. So personal statements carry a lot of weight in the application process. What that should mean to you is that you shouldn't leave this to the last minute. If you're applying to grad school, start working on that personal statement early and get lots of feedback. It is about helping, it is about your life, and it is about the field experience. Now, all of your personal statements should say, this is what I've done, or this is the reason I'm telling you what I've done. This is what I've done, and this is why it's relevant. Okay? You don't just list the things that you've done. You've got to have a reason for everything that you write in these personal statements. Just like any good essay. You've got to have purpose to your writing. They can look at a resume or CV to see everything you've done. That's not what a personal statement's for. It's about making a case for yourself. And so some people have asked in the past about, well, what if I did a research experience and now I want to go MFT? Well, you can talk about that, but you need to make it relevant for the audience. So you can say, I did this, and what I got out of it was X, Y, and Z. Now, I recently read an article in the Teaching of Psychology called Kisses of Death in the Graduate School Application Process. And I thought that you'd want me to share some of this information with you, right? So what this was a study where these two faculty members in psychology sent surveys to directors of admission in psychology programs. So that includes some masters, but a lot of PhDs as well. Even though that's the case, I think that this generalizes to most graduate programs. So let's see what some of them said about what the kisses of death were. Look at all this stuff. Personal mental health, excessive altruism, this is a lot of stuff that are kisses of death. This is a lot of places where you could go wrong in your personal statement, right? Let's take them one at a time. Personal mental health. In psychology programs, it may seem logical. That you tell someone, the reason I want to be a psychologist is because I suffered a major bout of depression, or because I loved my therapist who helped me with my anxiety disorder. And that might seem logical to you, but look at their perspective. They want healthy, stable professionals. They don't want somebody who they're worried about, who may be unstable. Okay? Especially if you're in the helping profession. You yourself have to be stable if you're going to provide help for someone else. So, it's okay sometimes to talk about obstacles you've overcome, but be careful with disclosing red flags. Stuff that may make them wonder whether you should be going to grad school or not, or whether you should just get your life in order. Okay? Excessive altruism. People don't buy it. Okay? These are things that have sank otherwise good applications. That's the thing that we need to note here. These applications were otherwise great, but they did this and they were a kiss of death. Excessive altruism is like saying, I only care about helping others and I would lay down my life to help my community. Yeah, right. Okay? Excessive self-disclosure. That kind of is related to the whole mental health thing, but it includes more than just that. It means that there are some things in your personal statement that are a little too personal, that maybe don't belong there. Remember, it's about relevancy, right? It's about what is going to help them know whether you're a good applicant. Not whether you're a good person, but a good applicant. Professionally inappropriate. And this is a pretty wide-ranging category here. It just means not following etiquette. Saying things that are a little off the wall, using language that's a little off the wall. This includes not just stuff in your personal statement, but if you get invited to an interview, this could sink you. Harmful letters of recommendation. Okay? Here are the things about that. If your letter of recommendation includes stuff that is actually undesirable, that could sink you. The notion is that typically you ask for a letter of recommendation from someone who's going to say something good about you. Not from someone who is sort of sitting on the fence about you, right? Or not someone who has this thing that they keep saying, God, I wish you would just do this. Can you write me a letter of recommendation? Yeah, sure. I wish you would really do this. Okay, so harmful letters of recommendation can sink. That's why it's really important to develop good relationships with professors. And like I've said before, other people have heard this. Ask them if they would write you not a letter of recommendation, but a good letter of recommendation. And if they're not willing to do that, then you don't get one from them. Get it from someone else. On a different note, there are inappropriate sources for letters of recommendation. I know people sometimes get desperate and they ask Uncle Fred, because Uncle Fred's known me since, I was born. So who better to write a letter of recommendation? Well, it's an inappropriate source of information. Here are the two things you need to keep in mind for letters of recommendation. They need to be able to assess your potential for success. It sounds like a real jargony thing, but pay attention to everything that's in there. They need to be able to assess your potential for success in that program. So there's some relevancy involved there, right? Your mom would say you're the best person in the world, but she may have no clue about what your potential for success in graduate school is. Okay? They also need to have legitimacy. And that's a no-brainer for PhDs. It's like, well, because PhDs are at universities, that's a legitimate source for a letter of recommendation. But they aren't the only sources of letters of recommendation. As long as you have legitimacy of some sort, somebody who is in a position of authority and who can say something good about your potential. So sometimes that could be a supervisor at the clinic that you volunteer at, right? Some other professional, some director, supervisor, those types of titles might be appropriate. Those are not inappropriate. They don't just have to come from professors. In fact, if you spent 4 years volunteering somewhere and only 1 semester in a professor's class, that volunteer supervisor is the better letter of recommendation than the professor. Lack of program knowledge is another kiss of death here. Okay? They know if you don't know about their program. And how do you express that? Well, understand what the program's focus is, right? And for PhDs, that's about what kind of research you're interested in doing. And that's about match. But for other programs, that's about the philosophy of the program. What do they train you to do? You better say that you're interested in doing what they train you to do. If they train you to be a researcher, don't talk about how you want to be in private practice. Right? That's a mismatch. And the other way around, if you want to go to an MFT program, then don't talk about how someday you're going to be an amazing researcher. That's also fit into the program. They want to make sure that you're a good fit. What that means is extra work on your part. If you're the type of person who has different interests and you're going to be applying to different kinds of schools, or even just different schools, it's going to be a little extra work on your part because you've got to tailor those personal statements to those schools. Don't write one form personal statement and then just change the last sentence. And this is why I think the University of Rochester is the best program for me. San Diego State University is the right one. We know. You can tell. Some pretty basic kisses of death here. Poor writing skills. Get somebody to edit your personal statement. Please. Please. Spelling and grammatical errors. You should not have spelling and grammatical errors. And you might think at some level, you know, but I said all the right things. I've got all the right grades, whatever. And you're going to ignore me because I had typos in my personal statement? Yeah. Because they're indicative of your dedication, your conscientiousness, and your seriousness about applying to this program. How hard is it to fix typos? Right? And if you can't even do that, what kind of graduate student are you going to be? Poorly written application materials. If most places have online stuff with sort of computer fill-in things, make sure you do that correctly. And some of them don't. Some of them are still not caught up to the 21st century. And they make you, you know, either type or write everything. I would say type if it fits well. If it doesn't fit well and it's a poorly constructed application when the only way you can do it is to write it in, then write it legibly and write it neatly. And if you don't have legible or neat handwriting, guilty. Then get somebody else to do it for you. It looks really bad. Also, misfired attempts to impress are kisses of death. Well, what does that mean? Well, some students, because they've been so successful in life with their charisma and their sort of personal interactions, and their, you know, you can butter up someone and you can tend to get out of jams and get things that you want, whatever. And so you may be tempted to do a little of that in your application, right? Oh, and the reputation of, you know, Kentucky University is just the best that I've ever come across. It's really transparent. And it will kill you if you otherwise look good. So don't try and do stuff like that. They know how good their program is. They don't need to be told. Okay. So now, given all this stuff, here's sort of the meat and potatoes of this. I know why some people are coming here. It's the numbers, right? What do I need to get into these programs? Okay. I need to add a disclaimer to this. And that is, even though I'm going to provide a lot of this information for you, every single one of these programs is going to come with this disclaimer that I'll say at the end, which is, however, programs vary. The admission scores, the minimum criteria, the median criteria, they all vary by program type and by individual school, by prestige of the individual school, and by competitiveness of the individual school. And so what you're seeing is kind of a heuristic, what you should shoot for if you want to get into these programs, not what you need to get into that kind of program. Let me give you some examples here. Clinical Psych PhD. If we looked at Clinical Psych PhD across the board, we would see mostly scores of 3.5 and usually better than that overall across clinical psych programs. Does that mean that if you don't have a GPA of 3.5 overall that you aren't going to get into a clinical program? No, it simply means that this is a heuristic. This is something you should shoot for to be competitive. Because if you look at the Clinical Psych PhD program at Alliant, you will see a much lower median GPA than the Clinical Psych program at UCLA. Same thing, Clinical Psych PhD program, different, completely different scores associated with them. And that's the same kind of program. Look what happens when you vary across kinds of programs. Clinical Psych versus Social Psych. Differences there as well. I'll get to that in just a sec. Median GRE scores around 1,200, and sometimes they're even more higher than that. Well, does that mean that you need 1,200? Not necessarily. Some schools have minimums, and some schools provide medians for you. All this information about individual programs is available in one place. Well, more than one place, but the easiest place to find it is the APA Graduate Study in Psychology book. Best place to find it. Median scores, minimum scores, stuff like that. And they do, this is in terms of the people who get into their programs. Just as an FYI, like we said before, the GREs scores for counseling tend to be lower than for clinical. Again, it's a competitiveness factor. Non-clinical PhD, like social psychology, you tend to see slightly lower median scores than the clinical psych PhD. And that's mostly, again, a function of numbers. More people are applying to clinical psych programs so they can afford to be more selective. Again, however, these vary by the prestige of the program. You want to shoot for a pretty good GRE score, somewhere in the 600s. Now, if you don't get it, doesn't mean you're not competitive unless they have a minimum requirement. Again, the more prestigious the program, the higher the GPA and the scores will need to be to get in. There are other requirements. They want you to do research. They want you to, sort of have had this experience to get in. They want those letters of recommendation, usually 3, most likely 3. And sometimes PhD programs will be looking for specific coursework. Most likely, experimental psychology or research methods. Our best preparation for the PhD at San Diego State is 410. 301 is a research methods course, and it probably at a minimum would be good for getting into PhD programs. And PhD programs don't know the difference between 301 and 410. They don't know what our system is. But if you want to be prepared for a PhD program, you need to have 410. Testing and measurement, again, courses that are associated with research skills, and stats at a minimum is going to be in there. For pre-doctoral and applied masters, at SDSU it's quite competitive. IO programs, again, because a lot of people want to be in there, because they make pretty good money, those GPAs tend to be higher. Their GREs vary widely. Last year, SDSU's GPA, well actually, is that last year? Yeah, last year their scores, their median scores were around 1100, so people were getting, over 500s on both of their sections, typically. And of course, they want some research experience in there. Again, note that this varies by the program you're applying to. MS counseling and some of the other related degrees, you see that there's less of an emphasis on GPA and GRE. And actually at SDSU, I've been told that there's almost no emphasis on GRE, even though it's a graduate school requirement. But they still want letters of recommendation, and they definitely want you to have field and life experience. And they put a heavy emphasis on how you perform during an interview. PhD programs